So this week I'm going to be recording with the Goryo's Vengeance deck that Jacob Wilson took to an 11th place finish at this past weekend's Grand Prix in Copenhagen. Um, my understanding is that this list was designed by a legacy mastermind, Bob Wong, or at the least, I don't know if it was designed because I'd seen it around on Moto for a decent amount of time before that, but I think that this specific list and the tuning and kind of the popularization pushes back to him. So previously, a lot of the Gore's Vengeance through the Breach decks have had Emrakul on top of Gristlebrand as your backup kill, but it's not necessarily the most reliable just to hit him with an Emrakul and run out. You, like, so there's a number of decks like Burn where they can just take the hit and then play another mountain and then lightning bolt you, and you're pretty far behind and not especially likely to win. So this deck has a number of ways to actually kill your opponent, almost guaranteed with the Goryo's Vengeance or through the Breach. So the kind of default obvious one is that you can through the Breach a World Spine Worm, and that's just a huge giant thing that dies and makes 15 power and good luck, have fun to your opponent. But the kind of really explosive thing this deck does is Goryo's Vengeance, a Gristlebrand, draw a bunch of cards, and then put a Enraged into play, and throw all of its lands at its opponent. So the big way that it does this, previous iterations of this deck have relied on Faithless Looting, or not Faithless Looting, Fury of the Horde to kill their opponent, untapping Gristlebrand and attacking again over and over. But this list uses Nourishing Shoal. It's a little less reliable of a kill compared to Fury of the Horde, I believe. But there's a lot of utility that it makes up for. It is actually a magic card. Like, you would never use a Fury of the Horde except for when you're killing them. Whereas this deck against Burn is actually really funny because you just have a main deck gain 11s. What are they supposed to do about that? Nothing. But there's this really interesting layer to this deck that isn't immediately obvious when you look at it, and it's probably the first deck to really use this mechanic in probably over a decade. The last time I think I saw anyone splice onto Arcane in an actual tournament, they were splicing Soulless Revival onto Cranial Extraction or Ethereal Haze and Kamigawa block to rebuy their Hanakami and set up a loop. So Nourishing Shoal in this deck is not only just a gain 11 or whatever. It's also so on Legacy when you show and tell to put a sneak attack into play, and if they counter the show and tell, that baits the counter, and if they don't, they just die because you have a sneak attack in play. It's basically that. So you can Nourishing Shoal, Splicing Vengeance on it for free. Or not for free. So the Shoal itself is free. The Splice of the Vengeance is 3 mana, but that's only one more than the actual Vengeance would cost. But instead of expending the Goryo's Vengeance in your hand, you're expending the Nourishing Shoal. And then you can Goryo's Vengeance again. So this is a way you can fight through counters game 1, even without having access to something more direct, like Inquisition of Kozilek or Pact Negation or Boseiju, like you see in the sideboard. That's a really powerful aspect of the deck. The same thing applies with Through the Breach. Through the Breach, actually, it's cheaper when you splice it, is worth noting. It's also why this deck opts to play Desperate Ritual. You're not really splicing Desperate Ritual onto anything, though in theory you can Nourishing Shoal, exiling Manamorphose, or exiling whatever, splicing a Ritual to get +1 mana, and then Ritual again for +1 mana, and use this to ramp up to a Through the Breach, but that's a lot of nonsense. More realistically, the play I expect to see is something tap 5, Ritual, Splicing Vengeance, use it as the bait, and you can Manamorphose into the Vengeance. Or actually you can't, because if it's countered you lose it. But anyways, it's another protection spell. So that's a really big aspect of the deck. Night's Whisper is another aspect. It makes it kind of a little bit harder for this deck to lose to pure attrition. Something like Liliana. It used to be that, I will say it is kind of still true. I think that this deck has a hard time against the Jund decks between Scavenging Ooze and Liliana the Veil and Thoughtseize. It's kind of difficult to assemble all the pieces you need. But if they're just on the discard plan, Night's Whisper is a really good way to fight back. Just going up 2 cards is great if they're trying to run you out of cards. It's pretty obvious to say. Let's see what other things. Manamorphose is a green card for Shoal. On top of being a way to filter. So, Manamorphose's big role is that once you draw a bunch of cards with Gristlebrand, you do need to actually get to black mana sometimes to Barigmos. So you can like Spirit Guide to Looting and then discard. And then like Manamorphose into a black into Goryo's Vengeance that way. It's a little bit cheaper than Through the Breaching. But it being a green card, again, is not irrelevant for these spliced Goryo's Vengeance plays. Nourishing Shoal lets you loop things when you're drawing a bunch of cards with Gristlebrand. And one thing I do want to point out, there's a couple interesting combo aspects of this deck that it's not always just like you make a big beast and then you bash him with it and then that's enough on your one turn. One thing, like, you can always just draw 7 with Gristlebrand if it doesn't look like you're going to go off, just like, except that you cast Goryo's Vengeance as a draw 7 and pass the turn and then untap and go off again next turn. That's a thing. You can Goryo's Vengeance on their end step because it says exile at the beginning of the next end step or sacrifice it on the beginning of the next end step with Through the Breach. So you can end of turn it. And if it resolves, you untap and you have access to all your mana as the way to put the Boborigmos into play. So that's like another aspect. You don't like. There's a lot of timing considerations with the combo here. The one land that is covered up, I will say, there are 4 Temple of Malices in this deck. Just additional filtering that this deck just gets access to. Only 2 Black Lucless. I actually was cutting down on that card in the older Goryo's list I was playing as well. There were actually a lot of times where you just wanted the 4th or 5th land for Through the Breach, and it could not be a Black Leafless, and that was a legitimate issue. Still a powerful card. Moving to the sideboard, you've got some interaction with creatures. Just kill things that are in play. Lightning Axe specifically, notably good against Scavenging Ooze. A bunch of anti-counter cards. Boseiju, Land, Inquisition, Disrupt, also good against other combo. Pact is exceptionally good against fighting against counter spells. And then your generic, your deck is broken. I have hate cards. Blood Moon, Amulet can race you. Can tag a bunch of other decks like Jund. It's not unreasonable against effect. It's not the best. And Shatterstorm, listen, this has just been a constant truth of Modern, is that if you are playing some degenerate combo deck, unless your deck is good enough to the point that it's going to be banned, you are going to lose the heads-up race to Affinity without a hate card. Because they get to be more interactive by playing cards like Spell Pierce, and they're just as fast as anything else that anyone is allowed to do in the format. So if you're building some degenerate combo deck, expect to need some hate card for that deck in your sideboard. Between Pyroclasm and Shatterstorm, you do have a lot of ways to slow them down, so that's a good news. Looking to sideboarding, I'm going to get back to you on that as I look through some of the material that Bob Wong has put out there about this deck. Overall, I expect this deck to... It has some scary things. A lot of people talk about it killing on turn 2. But I expect the more important thing, just like how we saw Amulet Bloom kind of make its headway into the format at the Pro Tour, the most important part of the deck is that people figure out how to make it flexible, because it's not the most consistent deck to kill them on turn 2, but this flexibility aspect of it is really what matters.